Hello everybody, this is Dr. Schroder with this week's video introduction to week number 6 of our course on evidence-based practice. And I hope everybody had a nice week off of week 5. We really didn't have any direct assignments due in the class this week. There was no discussion questions, no written assignments, although you did have some materials to review and some reading to do, and that focused primarily out of the John Hopkins book. The John Hopkins evidence-based practice book is sort of the main guide for this class from really for the rest of the class on out. And to kind of sort of bring up where we've been in the class, what we've done so far is each of you has identified a nursing problem. You've identified a new evidence-based practice intervention and developed a PICO statement for that. And your PICO statement includes both the actual intervention itself, the population that it's going to apply to, and the outcomes and the time frame that you're looking at. So that's actually quite a bit of information. And as I've been saying all along, this needs to be a real specific question, because as we get into your evidence-based practice part 2 assignment, you really have to discuss how you're going to implement this. How are you going to implement and explain and teach and get everybody on board with this new intervention that you're providing? And how are you going to measure your outcomes? And that's the focus of this week's discussion question is going to be. First, you're going to be reviewing an article, the Yoder et al. Article, talking about potential barriers with evidence-based practice implementation. And this is actually, in the real world of evidence-based practice, a real big part of what we do in evidence-based practice work. It's easy to come up with a great idea. Oh, well and good, we can do that, but we have to be able to put it into practice and put it into action. And so your evidence-based practice part 2, in large part, is really going to focus on that implementation process that you're going to use. And so the discussion question this week is to discuss the potential barriers that you might have. What are some, for example, possible staff resistance, possible people not wanting to change? How are you going to identify who your change people are going to be? How are you going to get your change team together? You have to really get people on your side whenever you do any kind of change, or it's a setup for failure. And I think that a lot of us can probably relate to that. If you've ever worked for an organization or worked somewhere where somebody has come up with a new process, a new plan, but then hasn't really followed it up or hasn't really explained the need, and so it doesn't really make much sense. So there's kind of a tendency to sort of do a regression to the mean, so to speak. People want to go back and do things the way that they were always done before. And so that tends to spell disaster. So that's kind of going to be what our discussion is going to be this week. The second part of the discussion question is identifying your SMART goals, or a SMART goal for your new practice implementation. And SMART is just it's another acronym, and it stands for specific, attainable, measurable, realistic, and time frame. So this is where you're going to, in the evidence-based practice paper, you're going to be doing SMART goals. You're coming up with objectives for both the implementation phase of your new practice intervention, and then for the evaluation outcome phase. In the evidence-based practice paper, I've already I answered some questions, so there's some guidelines up in the Ask Your Instructor forum that you can refer to, specifically how the paper will be laid out. But the paper does not start with an introduction. It doesn't start with that purpose statement, thesis statement, and all that. It really kind of carries over, and we start the paper with your PICO question, restated if necessary, your Appendix G with revisions as necessary from your evidence one, and then a discussion of what the findings, the 5 articles that you found. You've done appraisal tools on them, you've summarized the information in a table. Now you're going to be doing a narrative and really discussing a narrative of what the 5 articles mean, and specifically address any variation between the articles. Maybe some articles found, maybe there was a difference in outcomes. What were the differences in outcomes for these different articles that you looked at? what was the how were risk identified? What risk to subjects are there? And what risk possibly could there be to your patient population as you implement your new evidence-based practice? And then it ends up ends with a summary of the findings. And then after the implementation phase, and you're going to discuss sections of the paper on identifying who your stakeholders are, what are the resources that you're going to need to implement this change, what is it going to cost, and really get down into, what is it going to cost? Figure out, for example, if you need to order new equipment, if you have to hire an educator, if you have to give people time off to be trained to do this new intervention, whatever it is, this new protocol. All that has to be accounted for. Again, this is a really important piece in the real world of evidence-based practice. There aren't any questions in the class, but the two tables that you will be completing, one is your implementation plan, one is your evaluation plan. Think of your implementation plan, what you do prior to prepare for starting your new evidence-based practices. Not where you measure outcomes. For example, if you have a new teaching program where you're going to be helping to reduce falls or reduce infections or something like that. This isn't the table, the implementation phase. You're not doing any measurement of those outcomes unless it's to measure outcomes to identify what your baseline is going to be, to see where falls or your number of infections reduces over time. And so that first table is going to address any education needs, any ordering needs that you need to do. Who's going to write the policy table is what happens at the end of the time frame. After that 6 weeks or 6 months or however long you're going to give it, how are you going to go and measure your outcomes? And again, using these SMART objectives for that. This is where you're going to be applying your SMART objectives to your paper. And so that's quite a lot. And that pretty much is, you're going to have a conclusion. And the paper guidelines are pretty complete. But those are the, if there's two areas that probably have the most questions, it's been the questions that I've had so far in the class about how detailed does the variation or the discussion analysis need to be, and what is it about those two tables. And so know that that's what those differences between the two tables. The table one is your implementation prior to prepare, or that you're going to do to purpose intervention, and then your evaluation of outcomes is what you do after. How do you measure? Did you have was the outcome what you thought that it was going to be? And so this kind of sort of brings us back. This is why I've been saying all the way from week one, because if you don't have a good PICO question, if you don't have a clear intervention, if your intervention is vague, it's going to be hard in the paper to really do. It's not enough just to say that you're going to have a intervention that's going to, for example, improve nursing effectiveness. You have to have a way of measuring those. That's what's going to be addressed, particularly in this paper. So, of course, I'm here through the week as questions come up. I'll be participating along with you. We'll be back up to speed in the discussion questions. The paper, for sure, refer to my feedback in your first paper. If you have trouble seeing that feedback, remember, you have to click on the little blue tags in Blackboard. If you have any trouble with that, let me know, and I will go ahead and help you along with it. So I look forward to another great class with you, and I'll see you in the discussion forums.